Welcome back to another episode of Focus on K-12, EdTech, and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. Today, I talk with Marie Izquierdo, the Chief Strategy Officer for Miami-Dade County Public Schools, the fourth largest district in the country. We discuss what it's like to try to create and sustain success at scale. We also find out what's in the secret sauce at Miami-Dade. Let's dive in.
Thank you for having me. So I'm Marie Izquierdo. I'm currently the Chief Strategy Officer in the nation's fourth largest school district, which is Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And I'm also a former student in Miami-Dade, so I'm a lifer, as they say. I'm celebrating my 30th year in MDCPS, and I started as a student, obviously, and then a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal. I did a short stint for a year at the Florida Department of Education, leading the part of the Bureau of School Improvement. Then I came back and served as Mr. Carvalho's Deputy Chief of Staff. And then around Common Core time, I became the Assistant Superintendent of Academics, which is really my love. And then ultimately the Chief Academic Officer. And then just this January, I chose to accept the role of Chief Strategy Officer to provide some succession management for my successor, and also to lead a body of work around the development of the new strategic plan in MDCPS.
Yeah, I think that succession planning is something that is so important in roles. And I know it really sets some of the great leaders apart from others. So, and thank you for your many years at Miami-Dade and giving back to the community through the education system there. So, earlier this year, the work of Miami-Dade schools and a few other, large urban districts was really highlighted through the Council of Great City Schools, right? They put out the report, Mirrors or Windows. So I know you were involved, Miami-Dade was involved. Can you give a brief description of what the report is and how you were involved?
Absolutely. We knew about the report maybe, about 4 or 5 months before it was published. So we had some insight into this study. It was a 10-year study that the Council of Great City Schools had commissioned. And it looked at from 2009 to 2019, which happens to be the time that I was over curriculum and instruction in MDCPS, around the effects that poverty has on large urban school districts and whether or not districts across America are able to overcome those effects of poverty. So essentially what they did, they looked at NAEP, at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and they asked the question was whether schools are windows of opportunities and they help students overcome poverty and other barriers, or whether they mirror society's inequities. So they predicted, right? If a student is maybe poor, has English language a deficit, they're learning English as a second language, their level of parental education, whether the student is disabled, whether their literacy materials at home, race and ethnicity. And then they, based on those factors that are really, in many cases, mitigating factors, or actually hurtful factors rather, whether the trajectory of the student would be expected to be, and then what they actually were at these large urban school districts. And so they calculated what they called a district effect. And so they looked at, in reading and in mathematics in 4th and in 8th grade, that's when the NAEP is administered, whether or not, after considering all of those variables, what districts significantly had above statistical expectations or effects for their children. And in our district in Miami-Dade, we demonstrated results across all 4 areas, both grade levels, reading and mathematics, significantly above expectations, with district effects in double digits. In 4th grade math alone, it was nearly plus 15. So very, very significant, very rewarding to us that you're not destined for an outcome based on these factors that are beyond your control, opportunity gaps, if you will.
Yeah, so the report is very thorough, goes into really great detail, goes into the statistical side for anybody who really wants to get into that. There's plenty of charts and graphs for you. But Miami-Dade was highlighted throughout the report as being successful, to your point. So what do you think is sort of the secret sauce for Miami-Dade?
I get asked this question a lot, and maybe one day I'll write a book. But essentially, it's really our theory of action. And our theory of action focuses around a couple of areas that we are very consistent and methodical about. The first is really a singular focus on student achievement. That sounds, very, like, oh, everyone says that, but how we do that is aligning resources with needs and providing access and equity. So we do believe, and we've always believed, well before it was sexy, right, that children that have more needs deserve more resources, right? So this notion of every school gets the same has never been really the case in the last decade in Miami-Dade. We are absolutely over-resourcing schools with students that are living in poverty, that have all those other factors that we discussed earlier. Standards alignment to us is really important. So anything that we bring into the classroom that we adopt as a district has to be aligned to the standards, even if it's super popular, the latest and greatest. If we don't find, if our experts in academics do not find alignment, and we use certain tools that a lot of leaders around the country use that are public, to make sure that it's aligned to standards, and then that the way that it's delivered to students is on grade level. So we do not make excuses for students that are not on grade level. We make sure that we are attacking instruction at grade level and then helping them get there, but not watering down the curriculum. That's really important. And I think that if you ask any teacher or leader in our district, they'll say that that's probably their biggest kind of factor. We use data a lot. So data is our superpower. We're known for data. We have lots of different data practices that we share with other districts across the country that I think have given us a really laser-like focus on how we develop great teachers and leaders, how we resource schools, what kids need more, whether or not the standards are aligned, what kind of supplemental materials are we purchasing that are having the greatest effect on student achievement, and then keeping and doubling down on those and pruning those that are not. Choice is a big one for us as well. So making sure that kids are going to programs that are attractive to them. So that's going to obviously improve their engagement, find relevance in what they're doing. So we have like 77% of our students are exercising choice in Miami-Dade County. And then we have a laser-like focus on the most fragile schools. And we have certain practices and support structures in our most fragile schools. And of course, when you have a district that has 99% of its schools rated A, B, and C, that lowest tier of schools, what we call tier 3, are no longer F&D schools, but we still go through that process of capturing that lowest third of schools and supporting them, even when some of them are already rated, C's and B's.
Yeah, so that's a lot of work, right, that goes into doing something like this.
Yeah.
And when you think about the scale of Miami-Dade County Public Schools being as large as it is, right, 4th largest in the nation, like you said, doing that at such a large scale is really impressive. But then also, setting up a system that can sustain that over time becomes really important, right? Because I think there's a lot of districts that can do that for a couple years, right, but then sort of peter out. So how do you set up a system like that to be successful, sustained over time?
Sure. I would say that it's not a system, it's a series of systems and practices. And one of the things that I think in retrospect we're really good about is we're not like a flash in the pan. Like, we don't say, oh, this is like the latest and greatest practice, let's do this for a little while, or let's pilot it at some of our schools. And then you kind of either you leave it and some schools run with it over time, or it dissipates, and then you pile more different strategies and practices on top of that. We have very much kind of created practices that we're very consistent about. So I'll give you a couple of examples, but we could go on forever on some of these. But I mentioned DataCom before, which is how we look at data for not only our lowest performing schools, but that practice is now, it's a dashboard approach, but how we utilize even those dashboards that were designed for our lowest performing schools, but now they're available for all schools, and how we empower principals and leaders to use the same processes that we use here centrally to support those schools. Pacing guides. Our district every year renews and refreshes all of our pacing guides. Some districts might call those scope and sequences. So we know when a particular piece of content is being taught in a grade level, whether it's regular, advanced, or honors, across every subject. We push that out to teachers. We say the content is not negotiable. It has to be aligned to standards. It has to happen at a certain point in time because we're constantly progress monitoring our students. But the art is in the how, in the delivery, in how you develop or design that instruction, but the content is a non-negotiable. Synergy is our big training for all of our school sites. We have over 400 schools, and we have now it's been hybrid and virtual, but it used to be only face-to-face. It's very large, week-long. Now it's month-long training of our principals on anything that we're bringing on board that's new. We have every year we do a product rollout, which we call MAPs. So those MAPs are associated with their initiatives, if you will, and they're associated with the different priorities in our strategic plan. Every year schools know we're rolling out MAPs. Every year the schools know what those MAPs are, and then they develop school improvement plans that tie into those MAPs, right? How they are at the local schoolhouse going to support that priority. I can go on and on, but these are not, we don't like bring them in like many districts do, and then there's not ownership or accountability about them, and then someone else comes along and creates a new process that they think is better, or they read in a book, or they saw in a conference. We don't do that. We just kind of continuously refine the practices that we know have worked for us.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's always a lot of things really competing for district attention too.
Yeah.
Right. So when we look at the scope and the scale of the district, we look at how many things, from being in those district shoes at one point, right? How many things change every year, legislatively, and then also within the community, right? How do you decide as a district, where are we going to apply our focus and our attention, because those are such limited resources?
So I think first of all, I surround myself with very talented people, and I make sure that we are all communicating across functional areas. And that's one of the things that I think that the talents that I bring as a chief strategy officer, because large districts tend to be very siloed. And so when you are the chief strategy officer, you kind of sit at a perch where you don't have a bureau. Like I had a bureau of over 1,200 employees when I was the chief academic officer. I'm not over HR. I'm not over budget. I'm not over academics anymore. I kind of sit on a perch where I'm kind of making sure that there are connections going across those bureaus so that there's coherence in the organization. And then just really supporting and developing leaders, whether they're school site leaders or central office leaders. But for me personally, and you're right, 100%, there are many distractions. But for me personally, what I have been very intentional about, and I try to role model that for the folks around me, is number one, I've remained very intentional about visiting schools and remaining connected to school leaders. When I first came to the central office, I felt like, oh my God, I'm going to lose that connection. I'm going to lose like my ear to the ground at schools, like where the rubber hits the road or in classrooms. And so I continue to foster relationships with principals, assistant principals. They'll text me like, what are you guys doing? Why did you think that? Or have you given this any thought? So they have access to us. I think that's really important. And just being in classrooms once a week is something I make sure that I do. The second thing I think is considering the user experience for me. And sometimes I'm the pain in the butt in the room or in a meeting where I start bringing up like the end user, right? So I'm like, that decision, how is it going to affect students, teachers, and leaders? What does that look like? And so kind of forcing that conversation into everything we do, considering the end user. And then the third thing I would say is involving students in the decision-making process. So I'll give you an example. And making sure the students have agency and voice in our district is really important. I force it a lot. I want to make sure that that's always happening. And so when we did the strategic plan, we had a huge stakeholder outreach in the entire community. We have 26 municipalities, I believe, in Miami-Dade. So it's really hard to make sure you get everybody's voice. We have from one of the highest zip codes in terms of income to one of the lowest zip codes in the country within the same district. And so one of the things that we did is I was very intentional about we had 54 focus groups, and we had many of those focus groups were students, and a really nice cross-section of students. So students gave us a lot of feedback. We listened to students, and a lot of the priorities that emerged and a lot of the initiatives that are now being rolled out at the opening of schools were really generated by student voice. And so I think those are the three things that we use to just kind of stay focused and not have all these distractions.
All right, last one here. Let's move the focus away from Dade County in general here and on to Miss Izquierdo. So what do you think has helped you find success in your incredible education career?
Well, truth is, for me, this has been like a full circle experience. And I mentioned it earlier, I was a student, but I wasn't just an average student. I was the child of immigrant parents. I was an English language learner. I was on free and reduced lunch. My parents divorced when I was 5. So if you kind of look at that from my position now, the things that we're looking at, we're always looking at early warning indicators. We had dashboards that say, okay, these children are at risk of not graduating. I would have checked off all those boxes, right? I was certainly had many of those indicators in red. And so for me, I don't forget that, right? And I know that I am very privileged, and my children have had a wonderful upbringing and a wonderful privileged life, really, access to many things. But when you peel that onion, the reason why I had those opportunities and continue to have them is because of my education and the teachers that I had. I know many of them by name. I still remain in contact with many of them. I've served as principal of some of their schools. And for me, it's just knowing, really, truly knowing and having lived it, because there's people talk about it all the time. It makes for nice lectures, but or speeches, but having lived that, coming out of the circle of poverty and being able to break through it. And I did that because of educators that cared about me and a school district that afforded me opportunities. So for me, it's a matter of paying it forward, of being an example to a lot of our students, that they too, if they avail themselves of the opportunities that are before them, and that's my job to put them before them, they can live a good life and then pay it forward to the next generation.
Well, Maria, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and love the story and the work that you've been able to accomplish there.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate your time as well, and thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.